our domestic energy sector, eliminated divisive DEI from our federal government, stopped the weaponization of government, cut waste, fraud, and abuse, reinstituted America First trade and foreign policies, and ultimately restored common sense. The president also signed the Laken Riley Act into law, which ensures ICE will detain illegal aliens arrested or charged with theft or violence. As of today, the Senate has already confirmed 18 cabinet-level nominees, which is more than at this point under the Obama administration in 2009, and more than double the pace of the Biden administration in 2021. And today, we expect Kash Patel to be confirmed as the next director of the FBI. We are proud to announce that the president will host his first official cabinet meeting here at the White House next Wednesday, February 26th. In just 4 weeks, President Trump has already hosted the leaders of Israel, Japan, Jordan, and India. And next Monday, the president will host France's President Emmanuel Macron. And on Thursday, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will visit the White House as well. As you all know, over the past month, the president has taken questions from the press, all of you, nearly every single day, sometimes on multiple different occasions in the same day, on any topic any of you wish to talk about. President Trump set the tone on this approach immediately when he took more than 12 times the questions in his first few hours in office, as Joe Biden did in his entire first week. Yesterday, we hosted a local media row here at the White House with television and radio stations from across the country that reached up to 60 million viewers and listeners. In our ongoing pursuit of transparency on this one-month celebration, I am thrilled to bring 3 of my colleagues and our policy experts here at the White House to further recap this incredible first month of accomplishments in greater detail. We have Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller, the Director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, and our National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. I will hand it over to them. They will deliver brief remarks on the accomplishments of this administration in the first month, and then we will open it up to Q&A. When we open up the Q&A portion, I do ask, for the sake of efficiency in this room, that you direct your question to the principal you seek an answer from, and I will call on you in this room. But first, I will let them roll through their remarks, and first up, I'll turn it over to Stephen Miller.
Thank you. It's great to be back. And I want to just thank you all for joining today, our one-month celebration of the most historic opening to a presidency in American history. No president comes close to what Donald Trump has achieved over just the last 30 days. He has packed 8 years of transformative action, restoring this nation, restoring our laws, restoring fairness, restoring economic opportunity, restoring national security in just 1 month. No one in this country has ever seen anything like it. And when you look at the consequentiality and the significance and the transformative nature of the actions he's taking, it truly defies description. For example, in just one area, this nation has been plagued and crippled by illegal discrimination, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. It's strangled our economy, it has undermined public safety, it has made every aspect of life more difficult, more painful, and less safe. He has ended all DEI across the federal government. He has terminated all federal workers involved in promulgating these unlawful policies. He has ended diversity, equity, and inclusion in all federal contracting. He has restored merit as the cornerstone of all federal policy, restored the full, fair, impartial enforcement of our federal civil rights laws for the first time in generations. And he has cracked down on individuals across this government and nonprofits who have engaged in illegal racial discrimination against the American people. This includes making clear to every educational institution in this country that ending diversity, equity, and inclusion, ending unlawful race discrimination, is a precondition of receiving federal funds. He has also saved women's sports by ending the participation of men in women's sports. He has ended radical gender ideology across the entire federal government, and he's pressured the private sector to also end and combat radical gender ideology. He's reestablished the scientific and biological truth that there are only 2 sexes in this country, male and female, that those are biologically based determinations. They are not based and can never be based on gender identity. That includes rooting out of the Department of Defense all DEI policies, all critical race theory, all gender madness, and once again having a military that is focused solely and exclusively on readiness, preparedness, and lethality. As I'm sure Kevin will talk about more, of course, he has undertaken a historic cost-cutting effort across the federal government, launching the first ever Department of Government Efficiency, uncovering corruption on a scale that we never thought imaginable, terminating every single federal worker that we have found to be engaged in the corruption and theft and the waste of taxpayer dollars, and already saving $50 billion in a single year, which over a 10-year period would be $500 billion. Just think about how vast and enormous that sum is. Of course, as you all know, he has renamed the Gulf of Mexico to its correct and proper name, the Gulf of America. He has renamed Mount Denali into Mount McKinley, part of a historic effort to restore patriotism and national pride all across this land. He has ended the weaponization of the federal government, restored the Department of Justice to its true mission of combating threats to this nation and keeping the American people safe. He has ended all federal censorship of free speech. This has been one of the greatest crises that has plagued this nation. Years and years and years of the federal government violating the First Amendment to take away Americans' right of free speech. President Trump has ended that, and he has demanded that all federal workers, all law enforcement, cease any effort to intimidate the rights of Americans or to police their speech. He has also restored the death penalty at the Department of Justice, including for illegal aliens who commit murder, including for those who murder cops, and including for all of those who threaten Americans with heinous acts of violence. The death penalty is back, law and order is back, the streets are being made safe once again. On the public health front, he has launched the nation's first ever commission, the MAHA Commission, Make America Healthy Again, following the historic confirmation of RFK Jr., to finally uncover the true root causes of the public health crisis in this country, the childhood disease epidemic in this country, the spiraling rates of pediatric cancer, and devastating childhood sickness. He has finally created a situation where the federal health agencies in this country will be focused on preventing disease, on keeping children from getting sick in the first place, not sending them to a lifetime in and out of hospitals, suffering needlessly, when we can find ways to prevent this epidemic of illness. Then, of course, on Homeland Security. Today, it is officially the law of the land, at the conclusion of the congressional notification process, that 6 Mexican cartels and 2 transnational gangs, Tren de Aragua, or TDA, and MS-13, so 8 organizations in total, are now formally designated as foreign terrorist organizations, which means that every single member of those organizations who operates on U.S. soil is now, as a legal matter, a terrorist, and they will be treated as terrorists. This is a sea change in U.S. policy, and this means the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, along with the rest of U.S. law enforcement and the Department of Defense, are now operating in a legal reality where these cartels are recognized as terrorists. And there will be a whole of government effort to remove these terrorists from our soil and to degrade their ability to threaten or undermine any American security or sovereignty interests. Border crossings, since the day he took office, are down 95%. I think it's almost impossible to even describe the scale and scope of that achievement. President Trump, within days of taking office, cut border crossings 95%. And those few who have dared to cross are being either prosecuted or deported. They're either facing significant jail time for trafficking, smuggling, harboring, aiding, impeding, or they're being immediately removed from our soil. Either way, at the end of the process, they are going home. He's re-implemented Remain in Mexico, and he has obtained historic cooperation from foreign countries all around the world in accepting their deportees back. And he has used the United States military to fully seal the southern border with a historic deployment of both active duty and National Guard troops, resumed the building of infrastructure, he has opened up Guantanamo Bay, and he's using military aircraft to carry out deportations all across this country. And ICE is joining with ATF, DEA, and FBI to carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. The criminals are going home. The border is sealed shut. America is safe, sovereign, proud, and free. We are a nation that everyone in the world understands all across this planet. You do not come here illegally. You will not get in. You will go to jail. You will go home. You will not succeed. This is the biggest and most successful change in any area of law enforcement that this nation has ever seen, and he did it in under 1 month. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Stephen. One of the things that President Trump cares most about is job creation, and it was about 7 years ago I had the honor of joining you in this room for the first time, and it looks like we've created a lot more jobs in the last month. Look at how many people are here. My estimate is about 180, but I didn't count. So thank you. It's really an honor to be back here. I think that I just want to go over a few things and then hand it off to Mike. The first thing is that the president has told us to prioritize fighting inflation. And he had to do that because, as you know, President Biden let inflation get completely out of control. And he did it with policies that made no sense. They made no sense. A lot of times you people say to us, our friends the journalists, why are you doing that? But I like to think, why did they do that? Why did they spend so much money? And then why did the Fed print so much money so that we had inflation as high as we've ever seen since Jimmy Carter? So why did they do that? So we're addressing inflation. We didn't have to address it in the first term because it was always in the ones, almost always. But we're going to get it back there. And how are we doing it? Well, we're doing it with a plan that President Trump and I and others have talked about in the Oval that involves like every level of fighting inflation. First, the macroeconomic level. We're cutting spending. We're cutting spending in negotiations with people on the Hill. We're cutting spending with the advice of our IT consultant, Elon Musk. And then we're also looking into supply side things, like restoring Trump's tax cuts, maybe even expensing new factories so that there's an explosion of supply. If you have an explosion of supply and a reduction in government demand, then inflation goes way down. And then one of the things that you want to say is, well, when are you going to see it? Well, the first thing that you'll see when the markets believe that we're going to get inflation under control is that the 10-year Treasury rate goes down, because that's how they think about future expected inflation. And so we're still going to see some memory of Biden's inflation. It's not going to go away in a month. But the 10-year Treasury before the last consumer price index had dropped about 40 basis points. 40 basis points because markets were optimistic about our ability to fight inflation. 40 basis points is kind of not a fun thing to say. Economists talk that way. I apologize. But the way to think about it is, for a typical mortgage, if that affects the mortgage rate, then it's going to save a typical family buying a house about $1,000 a year. And that's just in our first month. Okay. The second thing we've done is we've had a lot of trade talks. In fact, I was just meeting a minister from Mexico with Howard Lutnick just a couple of hours ago. And we're talking about reciprocal trade, and we're also talking about the fentanyl crisis. And so reciprocal trade is about our government treating other governments the way they treat us. We want trade to be fair. It turns out that Americans have been disadvantaged by foreign governments over and over, and President Trump wants it to stop. And the fact that struck me as most noticeable when I started to look at what President Trump was asking us to do is that last year we have data, U.S. companies paid $370 billion in taxes to foreign governments. $370 billion. Last year, foreign multinationals paid us $57 billion in taxes. We have 1/4 of world GDP. They have 3/4 of world GDP, and we're paying 370, they're paying 57. This is not reciprocal. We're going to try, or we're going to, fix it. The other thing that we've done is we've had an all-of-the-above energy approach that's led by Doug Burgum and Chris and a really large team, EPA. And we've already made so many actions that are going to affect the price of energy and lower inflation. We've opened up 625 million acres to energy exploration. We've cut 50 years of red tape that makes it so you can't have permits. And we've even made it so that when you go home, if you get a new one, then you can take a shower or flush a toilet or read under a light bulb. We're doing that too. So finally, let's just think about like the facts that we can see right now that we think are awesome. So guess what? Small business optimism has gone up by the most ever since President Trump came in. ISM, which is the measure of what's going on in manufacturing, it's expanding again for the first time in years. CEO confidence is the highest it's been in years. And the reason people are thinking this is that our policies give people cause for optimism. And then I want to reiterate what Stephen Miller said, because it's so important, and it's so important for financial markets to start to digest this, that if, say, the Treasury Secretary or any cabinet secretary with Elon Musk is able to find some savings, say $100 billion, well, in CBO land, that's actually like about 10 times that, or maybe 12 times that, over a 10-year window. And so when you're thinking about the negotiations right now over reconciliation and thinking about, well, 4 trillion, 5 trillion, well, those numbers in terms of the savings are going to end up being small because of all the waste that we're finding. And so we're incredibly optimistic about the future of inflation and the future of our economy, and we're optimistic because we're making so much progress so far, and we already see it in market prices. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mike.
All right. Thanks, Gil. Well, good afternoon. What a month, and what a sea change in our foreign policy. In addition to what we're doing on the border and restoring American sovereignty, in addition to what we're doing in our economy and the job creation and the inflation reduction, we are bringing the world back to where it was at the end of President Trump's first term, which is a world of peace, prosperity, and looking forward and getting us out of the chaos that we've just seen over the last 4 years. So over the last month, just to name a few, I had the honor of sitting in the Oval Office as President Trump spoke with President Putin, and then immediately spoke with President Zelensky, and both of them said only President Trump could bring both sides to the table, and only President Trump could stop the horrific fighting that has been going on now for the better part of 4 years, and that only President Trump could drive the world back to peace. Both of those leaders said that in back-to-back calls. And of course, we just had our historic talks mediated by our good friends and partners, Saudi Arabia. We give great thanks to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for hosting, and sat down for the first time in years with the Russians and talked about a path forward with peace. On top of that, and one of the things that led to that, was the tremendous confidence building measure that we had with the release of Mark Fogel. I'll remind everyone, the last time that we had an American released from the Russians, either we gave up a deadly spy, pressured our allies to give up a lethal killer, or we released, under the Biden administration, the world's most notorious arms dealer, Victor Bout, who, by the way, had one of his main clients for arms, the cartels in Mexico and Central America. We gave up none of that. This was released as a confidence-building measure, working with our great Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, and our Secretary of State as a first step towards opening these talks and then moving forward towards peace. On top of that, we've secured, just in a month, the return of 12 American hostages from Russia, from Bulgaria, from Venezuela, the Taliban, and Hamas. Excuse me, that's from Belarus, not Bulgaria. We also had, for the first time in quite some time, we took out a senior leader of ISIS, an international financier and recruiter that the military had been trying to take out for quite some time. And wasn't able to do so, frankly, because of a bureaucratic approval process. President Trump said, take him out, and that ISIS financier and leader is no longer on this earth. We've also taken action to eliminate other terrorist organizations in the Middle East. We drove, before the president was even in office, he started talking consequences for people that would hold Americans. Heretofore, there's been nothing but upside. You take an American, you get some better deal. You take another one, maybe you get a better deal. No more. There is now nothing but downside for taking Americans illegally, either as hostages or illegal detainees. And when President Trump sent a very clear message across the Middle East, but particularly to Hamas, that there would be all hell to pay, we suddenly saw a breakthrough. And now we just saw the release of yet another group of hostages. There have been dozens now, including two Americans that we've seen once again reunited with their
There
families.
was
As
a
part of
social
the talks
contract
with King Abdullah
that exists.
he offered, and I think the entire world has graciously accepted, to take 2,000 sick children, cancer patients, and others out of Gaza as a humanitarian gesture. 2,000 Gazans will come out of that hellhole that it is, that wasteland that Gaza is right now, with unexploded ordnance, with debris everywhere, with no sewage, with no water. And President Trump has put forward a plan to deal with the practical reality that is 1.8 million Gazans now truly suffering. And then, just to bring it back to our own hemisphere, we've seen literally in the last month, after years of national security experts, the generals in charge, and others testifying and ringing the alarm bells about the Chinese Communist Party's presence in our own hemisphere, particularly in the Panama Canal. We're seeing the leadership of Panama step away from the Belt and Road program, move away from China and back towards the United States, and even enter into talks and other negotiations about addressing the ports on either side of the canal. And then finally, last but not least, we've had 4 world leaders in the White House, in the Oval Office. We've had the Prime Minister of Japan, the Prime Minister of India, the King of Jordan, and of course the Prime Minister of Israel, just in the last 4 weeks. And next week, we'll have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and we'll have the President of France, Macron. So President Trump is on what we call Trump warp speed. We are all honored to be really serving under his leadership and his vision. And truly, when we all say, and the president himself says, he is a president of peace. He is a president focused on restoring stability. I think the entire world saw what the world will look like without strong American leadership in the last 4 years. And it's truly been an honor to get us back to where we were and back on track under President Trump's leadership.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm sure you're very eager to ask questions of these very smart people working very hard on behalf of the president. We do have somebody in our new media seat today. We have John Stoll, who is the head of news at X. As you all know, you're all on X. It's home to hundreds of millions of users, a large contingent of independent journalists and news organizations across geographies and political spectrums. And at the same time, X remains the go-to platform for many legacy news outlets. And I know, as I mentioned, many of the reporters in this room use X to attract eyeballs to your work. Prior to joining X, John spent 2 decades in journalism, including several years as an editor at the Wall Street Journal. We are excited to have him in the briefing room today. John, we'll let you kick it off. And as I said at the top, please direct your question to the individual up here who you'd like an answer from. John, why don't you begin?
All right, thank you very much.
They're making moves, I see.
For a thriving ecosystem.
Trump making moves.
Independent and emerging news organizations who do depend on X for publicity, for a business model. And so I look forward to seeing many of them in this seat in months and years to come. I also thank you, Caroline, for opening this seat up to new media. It really is a testament not only to your open-mindedness, but also to innovation, that you'd actually think about, folks that are not traditionally credentialed to be in this room, and not only have a question, but also to witness. This is a very important intersection of power and the free press. And so just the ability to witness this and be part of it, it brings everybody's game up. So thank you for that. I think this is for Mike Waltz.
Okay.
My question is about Ukraine.
Sure.
For about more than 10 years, I've been fascinated, like many, with what's going on. Was in Northern Europe, working out of the Baltics when Crimea was annexed, and was a lot of this came on Twitter. The platform used to be known as Twitter. Was a lot of European leaders would talk about their disappointment and solidarity with Ukraine, but when it came to actually doing something, it felt like they were casting a hot potato and sent it over the Atlantic. I wonder how much of what we're seeing right now out of the administration of President Trump is a call to Europe and the European leaders and the allies that we've traditionally had to pick up that hot potato and start doing something a little bit more concrete to win and preserve the peace in Ukraine. The second question I have is, it's related, is there's been a lot of speculation that President Trump and the administration might be manipulated by Vladimir Putin. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about the administration's posture and your confidence in the competence of this administration to go toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin.
Well, if there's I'll take the second question first. If there's anybody in this world that can go toe-to-toe with Putin, that could go toe-to-toe with Xi, that could go toe-to-toe with Kim Jong-un, and we could keep going down the list, it's Donald J. Trump. He is the deal maker in chief. There is no question that he is the commander in chief. And I, for one, and I think all Americans and around the world should have no doubt about his ability to not only handle Putin, but to handle the complexity of driving this war to an end. And then on your first piece on Europe, I'll take you back to 2014. You're right, there was a lot of hand-wringing in Europe and not a lot of action. There's also a lot of hand-wringing here in Washington under the Obama administration and not a lot of action. They literally threw blankets at the problem. And so I'll remind everyone that Putin had some type of conflict, invasion, or issue with their neighbor under President Bush with Georgia, under President Obama with Ukraine 2014, not under President Trump 45, and again with President Biden in 2022. The war should have been deterred. The war should have never happened, and I have no doubt it would not have happened under President Trump and will stop under President Trump again. But I just want to push back on this notion of our European allies not being consulted as we've entered into this process. I already mentioned the immediate phone call President Trump made to President Zelensky. He has talked to President Macron of France repeatedly last week. President Macron convened European leaders and then is coming here on Monday. Prime Minister
a social
Starmer
contract
is coming
that existed
next Thursday. I've talked to every one of my national security advisor counterparts across the spectrum in Europe. I've talked to Secretary General Rutte, the leader of NATO, the Secretary General of NATO. We have repeatedly, oh, by the way, we had half our cabinet, 7 cabinet officials, including the vice president, at the Munich Security Conference, all engaging, all listening, and all making sure our allies are heard. However, we've also made it clear for years, decades even, that it is unacceptable that the United States and the United States taxpayer continues to bear the burden, not only of the cost of the war in Ukraine, but of the defense of Europe. We fully support our NATO allies. We fully support the Article 5 commitment, but it's time for our European allies to step up. And one of the things that Secretary General Rutte said on our call was, this last couple of weeks have been a real wake-up call. And I asked him, what have you been missing the last couple of years? The fact that we are going to enter into a NATO summit this June with a third of our NATO allies still not meeting the 2% minimum, a commitment they made a decade ago, literally a decade ago, with a war on their doorstep, the largest war that they're all extremely concerned about, but yet it's, well, somebody else needs to pay. We've got other domestic priorities. It's unacceptable. President Trump's made that clear. And the minimum needs to be met. We need to be at 100% in this June at the NATO summit. And then let's talk about exceeding it, which is what President Trump has been talking about with 5% of GDP. Europe needs to step up for their own defense as a partner, and we can be friends and allies and have those tough conversations.
Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. I have a Ukraine one and a Doge one. Who can talk Doge? All of us. Well, so Stephen, we're hearing about these Doge dividend
All right,
checks that would be
this is-
20%
oh, wait,
back to
hold on.
taxpayers, 20%
Hold on.
paid down the debt.
Let's hear this
60%
part.
is left. Who gets that?
Well, the way that it works is when you achieve savings, you can either return it to taxpayers, you can return it to our debtors, or it can be cycled into next year's budget, and then it just lowers the overall baseline for next year. So in other words, you can just transfer it into the next fiscal window and then lower the overall spending level. and that means that you can achieve a permanent savings that way, and that reduces the deficit.
And when is it that people might see those checks?
Well, this is all going to be worked on through the reconciliation process with Congress that's going underway right now. As you've seen, the Senate's moving a bill, the House is moving a bill. The President has great confidence in both chambers to deliver on his priorities. I would just take this opportunity to note that President Trump has made a historic commitment to the working class of this country to fight for major tax relief and major price relief. And cutting spending, as DOJ is doing, and cutting taxes is the key to delivering on both of those promises, and President Trump is resolutely committed to doing both.
Thank you. And on Ukraine, I guess this is for Mike.
Sure.
After the president's post on Truth Social yesterday, need to know, who does he think is more responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Putin or Zelensky?
Well, look, his goal,
Good
Peter,
question.
is to bring this war to an end, period. And there has been ongoing fighting on both sides. It is World War I style trench warfare. His frustration with President Zelensky is that you've heard is multifold. One, there needs to be a deep appreciation for what the American people, what the American taxpayer, what President Trump did in his first term, and what we've done since. So some of the rhetoric coming out of Kyiv, frankly, and insults to President Trump were unacceptable, number one. Number two, our own Secretary of Treasury personally made the trip to offer the Ukrainians what can only be described as a historic opportunity. That is for America to co-invest with Ukraine in their minerals, in their resources, to truly grow the pie. So case in point, there's a foundry that processes aluminum in Ukraine. It's been damaged. It's not at its current capacity. If that is restored, it would account for America's entire imports of aluminum for an entire year. That one foundry. There are tremendous resources there. Not only is that long-term security for Ukraine, not only do we help them grow the pie with investments, but we do have an obligation to the American taxpayer and helping
Oh my
them
gosh.
the
There's a
hundreds
shit
of
playing in
billions
the background.
that have occurred. So, rather than enter into some constructive conversations about what that deal should be going forward, we got a lot of rhetoric in the media that was incredibly unfortunate. And I could just tell you, Peter, as a veteran, as somebody who's been in combat, this war is horrific. And I think we've lost sight of that, of the literally thousands of people that are dying a day, families that are.
That part, he's speaking the truth. He's speaking some truth at that part. It gotta end one way. It has to come down to an end. So let's give Trump some wiggle room. Let him do what he do. You feel me? Let him do what he do. All right, let's keep on moving. It's gonna be a long. Oh, my bad. I didn't even get my intro out of the way. What's going on, Chad? My bad. I am, of course, your host, Mr. DJ Grimlock. This is another episode of Stay Woke TV. I decided to jump on here. We're not gonna be listening to hip hop today. We got some hip hop news. There's barely any good news though. Hip hop has been boring. So we're gonna go through some topics today. Hopefully we'll find a couple of hip hop topics that we can finally go, get a little bit hyped about. One thing for sure is supposedly the Drake album is selling really good. We're gonna go through first week estimates or whatever. However, I think his album is what? It's one this week, right? It's number one. So yeah, people are liking the album. I like the album too. There's like 4 or 5 songs on there I like. So yeah, we just gonna go through the topics, man. I don't really got a good intro for y'all today. Let's get to some, get some work, man. Y'all know me. I don't like to waste no time. Let's get to work.
Hey, this is B here from Club 520, your road partner.
Come on, man. Sponsored by Roe, the family, big supporters of what they got going on over there, man. Listen, man, you trying to get right in the bedroom, you got to go and tap in with Rose Sparks. First of all, you got to go online so they can make sure they can prescribe you this. You know what I'm saying? This is something that's healthy for you. They have professionals to make sure that you can actually use the product before you tap in, and then be here and tell them how it go.
Yeah, this is a prescription-based medication only. So once you get it, man, it takes 15 minutes to kick in, And once you're ready to go, you're ready to go, man.
Most definitely, man. Just dissolves right there. Like I'm saying, get you a little 15 minutes on average. And listen, you can do whatever you want to. It's good for 36 hours if you want to spin the block.
Wait, how are all these sex companies just flooding these niggas with money? Where are you getting this money from?
So we come from that Panther cloth, and a lot of drug dealers, big time drug dealers, you know, that crack era hit us hard too. So like we just full of game. So when y'all hear Tupac saying he got that game from here, that's what it's about. It's about the game, and we on the island. So in the whole United States, it's the only place that probably don't have no gangs. So we don't have no gangs, not no black gangs.
Yeah.
So,
All right, we'll come back to this. I ain't gonna lie to you, it kind of looked like a boring interview, but we'll see. Let's not jump to conclusions.
Well, welcome back to 13 News at noon. As we continue to follow President Trump's overhaul of the federal government, this afternoon we are learning his latest move includes cuts at the Pentagon. His defense secretary planning about $50 billion in cuts. Here's NBC's Garrett Hake with more.
A legal showdown looming over a key part of President Trump's agenda. Overnight, an appeals court ruling that his executive order limiting birthright citizenship will remain blocked. Another court had ruled the order violates the Constitution, which extends American citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil.
We'll end up winning that court in the Supreme Court.
But the president is moving forward on another priority, reshaping the federal government, with new changes potentially reaching the nation's military and Social Security. As he requires that more federal departments line up with his agenda, Trump also posting, quote, "Long live the king" yesterday, while aiming to get rid of New York City's congestion pricing. The White House following up with doctored images. New York's governor writing, quote, "We are a nation of laws, not ruled by a king." As behind the scenes, the major material changes from Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency continue.
You take a look at Doge and you see what's happening.
This morning, the Pentagon is in the cost-cutting crosshairs of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, with Doge staffers now inside the Defense Department, according to senior officials. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ordering the Pentagon brass to find a way to cut the defense budget by roughly $50 billion, according to the Defense Department, while 5 sources tell NBC News some generals and other high-ranking officers may also be on the chopping block. Many of those closely associated with former Biden Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, or who've worked on programs seen as politically out of line with the Trump agenda. Yesterday, the president also floating a new use for any Doge-related savings.
We're thinking about giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% down to pay back debt.
But any such spending would require congressional action, and the president did not say where the remaining money would go.
We're not some deep state that has ulterior motives. I want to go to work. I want to help veterans.
In December, Marine veteran Andrew Lennox started a job he considered a calling at the VA hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, working as an administrative officer. He says his firing by email late last week surprised even his direct supervisors.
What does that tell you about the reasoning behind it?
It was arbitrary and it wasn't thought out.
All right, gang, are you all ready?
I thought that shit wasn't. Is the sound working? Let me check the sound. No, we is not ready, man. Not for your. No, let me stop.
That we'd end up seeing something closer to the. This comes just hours before the IRS is scheduled.
Under consideration, a new concept where we give 20% of the Doge savings to American citizens and 20% goes to paying down debt because the numbers are incredible.
And his goal is very simple, to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and let all the outsiders pay.
What's up, guys? It's Graham here. And how would you like to receive a few $1,000s for doing absolutely nothing? That's right. Even though you probably thought that stimulus checks were a thing of the past, think again. In a remarkable turn of events, the Department of Government Efficiency proposed that a portion of their savings should be given back to U.S. citizens as a dividend. And now Donald Trump seems to agree, basically implying that
this whole time, none of this shit is working. Look. Oh, it is. Never mind, it is working.
Instead of you paying the government is going to pay you, especially since the savings currently stands at $55 billion and growing. That's why we really have to talk about exactly what this means, what you could expect, how much you might realistically receive, and the details that almost everybody misses. Because unlike the previous stimulus checks of 2020, there is some fine print that could either be really good or really bad for you, depending on how much money you make, or I guess don't make. So you're gonna wanna hear this. Although before we start, as usual, usual, if you appreciate the breaking news videos where I basically cancel everything I'm doing to try to get this out on time, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like button or subscribed if you haven't done that already. And as a thank you, advisory to help the government identify inefficiencies and what they see as wasteful spending. So far, this has included a $6.5 billion cut from U.S. aid, $500 million from the Department of Education, $230 million from the Social Security Administration, $190 million from the General Services Administration, $170 million from the Agriculture Department, $152 million from the Department of Health and Human Services, $130 million from the Transportation Department, and $119 million from the Commerce Department. It's also estimated that 6,700 IRS workers will be terminated who are not deemed critical to filing season, a push to return government workers to the office, and a federal buyout for those who wish to voluntarily resign. But what's even more shocking is that after seeing all of this, one user on X suggested that a portion of these funds be returned to taxpayers in the form of a dividend. Elon responded, Trump agreed, and here we are. Crazy, right? So how much of this could go back to you? Well, first of all, I see this mistake being made all the time. You can't just take the total sum of all savings, divide that by the entire population of the United States, and expect to get an accurate answer. After all, that number encompasses children, non-taxpayers, non-citizens, and 185-year-olds still collecting Social Security. That was a joke. So if we want to calculate the number of people who paid taxes in any given year, according to the Tax Foundation, 77 million people, or the top 50%, paid 97.7% of all income tax in the United States. And if we round up to the people who paid some amount of income tax in the prior year, I think it's pretty safe to say that roughly 85 million people would theoretically get to benefit from a tax refund. From there, we then have to calculate what percentage of those savings could then be given back to each person. And according to Trump, this could amount to 20%, meaning if Doge cuts $55 billion worth of spending, 20% of that is $11 billion. Spread that amongst 85 million people, and each person would receive, wait for it, $129, with the rest being applied towards other initiatives and paying down the government debt. Of course, keep in mind that Doge has only been operating for a month, and if these savings continue at the same trajectory, over the course of a year, each person could see a $1,550 refund. So all of a sudden, those begin to add up. For example, in the beginning, Doge aimed to cut $2 trillion worth of unnecessary expenditures. And if that were to happen, unlikely as it is, take 20% of that, spread it amongst 85 million people, and that is where you get the $5,000 headline that you've probably seen on the news. However, do keep in mind that that $2 trillion figure was later backtracked by Elon Musk, who called it the best case scenario, especially considering that the discretionary budget only went as high as $1.7 trillion. And just recently, Elon Musk tweeted that I never mentioned a specific dollar figure, just said that I would see if the president wanted to consider a tax reduction linked to Doge savings. The amount would therefore obviously be proportional to how much savings Doge actually achieves. The top Doge priority remains, however, reducing the deficit to stop inflation and lowering people's interest rates. Although despite some of these numbers coming in much lower than expected, according to the proposal, the goal is to right the wrong done to the taxpayer, share the benefits of cost cutting, boost morale to increase U.S. tax receipts, and incentivize the labor force participation in 2025. On top of that, unlike the COVID-era stimulus checks, which were given out by individual with an income below a certain threshold and then phased out, it's not out of the ordinary to think that the same would apply here, except the exact opposite, as in, the more money you make and paid in taxes, the more money you would get back. After all, if someone paid $100,000 to the IRS, they should, in theory, be entitled to a greater percentage of the refund than the person who only paid $100, since that person contributed more. However, in terms of the likelihood of this passing, as well as the impact this is probably going to have on the economy, inflation, and its effectiveness of actually making a difference, you're going to want to hear this, because there's a lot of misinformation floating around on the internet that you're going to want to be made aware of. Although before we go into that, just like it's important to be careful and aware of how your tax dollars are spent, it's equally as important to be protective of the data that you share online. To give you an example of this, I've been traveling a lot lately for my podcast, The Iced Coffee Hour, and I've heard horror stories of what happens when you connect to a random Wi-Fi network only to find out that you've given a complete stranger access to all of your information. Prevent hacker and phishing attempts, allowing you to surf the web safely. Try it out. I'm on record to say that current policy is significantly less restrictive than it had been before the rate cuts, meaning we're unlikely to see them cut interest rates even further anytime soon, given the high probability of prices, believe it or not, going higher. In fact, according to their statement, it was indicated that firms would attempt to pass on to consumers higher input costs arising from potential tariffs. Or in other words, if companies end up paying more, then you end up paying more. All of this points to a very strong chance that we're probably not going to see any rate cuts anytime soon. The economy is going to remain strong because of tax cuts and deregulation, which is going to keep prices elevated, and they're going to take a wait-and-see approach for inflation to eventually return back to their 2% target, which could be a while. Separate from that, there's also the concern that another government payout is going to contribute to inflation and make it worse. And the answer to that is somewhat mixed. See, previous research suggested that 42% of the COVID-era inflation was the result of stimulus checks, which is certainly a lot, but since inflation is primarily caused by spending and not saving, one analysis made the argument that any inflation we see from this would be mild at most, because the households receiving a refund would be more likely to stash it away or invest instead of spending it. Therefore, it wouldn't contribute as much to consumption. On top of that, this check wouldn't be printing more money out of thin air. It would simply be returning what people had already paid. But in terms of what I think about this, realistically, if people get a $100 to $1,000 check out of nowhere, most likely it's going to be spent. That's just the way it is. I mean, keep in mind, as of now, the personal savings rate is at an all-time low. Household debt is at an all-time high. And if I were to bet, if $11 billion suddenly enters the economy again, there would most likely be a small uptick in inflation, albeit probably a lot smaller than what we saw back in 2022. Of course, you could also make the argument that tax cuts are inflationary, or really anything that gives people more money back in their pockets is likely to cause prices to rise at least a little bit. But all of that is to say that realistically, we're not going to get rate cuts anytime soon. There's likely going to be a long road ahead of us, especially if tariffs end up being passed back to the consumer. And we're likely going to have to patiently wait for inflation to return back to 2% before we see any movements on interest rates. That is, of course, unless we see a recession or any black swan event that we just can't see coming. Although, in terms of your chances of getting a refund check and my thoughts about everything that's just happened, here's what you need to know. Overall, I think you could tell I'm a fan of reducing government spending, waste, unnecessary expenditures, whatever you want to call it. I think it's long overdue. I mean, there should be no reality in which the Pentagon fails its 7th audit in a row, politicians are caught taking bribes, and hundreds of billions of dollars goes missing. It just seems common sense that all government spending should be public and traceable down to the penny. Or, I guess in this case now, down to the nickel. I just think there's no accountability and no incentive for the government to spend any less money because they become so accustomed to just pressing a button and printing more money that it doesn't matter. And the go-to solution has just been borrow more money, tax the rich, and blame the other side for your problems. And this applies, by the way, to both Democrats and Republicans. Neither side is perfect. This has been going on for decades. So from that perspective, yes, I am all for it, and I think there's a lot to cut down on. But it's yet to be seen how much of a difference this will actually make, how much can realistically be saved, and whether or not it's dangerous to take a cut first, find out later approach. Like, admittedly, I have concerns about cutting services or departments which could be of service, but won't be found out until much later, until maybe some damage is done. Now, the flip side to this is that slowly cutting spending and then evaluating its effectiveness could take years or even decades. So I see why they're taking a cut very fast approach here. But, like I said, I don't doubt that there are some uncertainties here that we're not going to know until much, much later. Like, remember that article about 150-year-olds collecting Social Security? Well, as it turns out, one of Trump's appointed commissioners clarified that these were simply people on record who didn't have a certificate of death, not that they were actually receiving benefits. And apparently, the Social Security Administration stops payments to people who are older than 115 years old, which has been in effect since 2015. I say this just to temper some of the expectations of massive savings up front, and some of the headline numbers you'll end up seeing are pretty ambitious. Not to mention, if you actually want to make a sizable difference to the government deficit up front in a way that's not controversial, 2 economists propose that you could simply allow agencies to roll over unused funds into the next fiscal year and don't let Congress use the funds as a gauge by which they reduce future budgets. I know, right? It just seems, again, it's common sense. I don't see how anyone could disagree with this. Prove me wrong. Secondly, as far as your likelihood of getting a refund, I actually think it's a pretty good chance over the next year or 2, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. After all, any savings would have to be audited, locked in, and guaranteed long-term before you get any money back. Personally, I think
I've never liked calling too much attention. Yeah, I've had the
Okay, when we see it, you see it. And right off the top, we begin with this breaking news out of Capitol Hill. Turn a page.
All right, lots to discuss with our reporters and analysts. With us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent.
All right, how are we? Is that better? Hopefully it's good now.
The move will march.
No, it's not good.